Idaho murder suspect Kohberger arrested in 2014 record show. That's like, what, 9 years ago? It's a long time ago. The man accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students in their off-campus house last fall was arrested for theft almost a decade before the grisly stabbing spree. Records show. I'll have to look this up. Brian Kohberger, then 19, was charged with misdemeanor theft in Monroe County, Pennsylvania, for allegedly stealing his sister's iPhone in 2014. How the heck did that go down? Listen, I've had some fights with my siblings before and stuff like that, but like, I don't know, to call the cops on your sibling, that's elevating to a whole different level. Kohberger's father, Michael, alerted police to the alleged theft, court records indicate. Michael Kohberger told police that his son, who was struggling with drug addiction. Oh, I think I remember hearing about this, that Kohberger was addicted to drugs at some point. Like, was it like high school or like in his 20s? Warned him not to do anything stupid after making the discovery that he stole the phone. Why would he steal his sister's phone? That's so weird. Kohberger did not serve jail time for the theft. There's no remaining public record. I mean, it has nothing to do with this case, but I don't know. I searched Kohberger earlier and I was like, oh, this is interesting-ish. Kind of, not really. The state had about, was it like 60 days from... Yeah, they had 60 days to decide whether or not they wanted to go for the death penalty. And you know what? They did. I wasn't sure if they were going for it because I thought that, like, I don't know, maybe they're sitting on a lot of like hardcore evidence that we just don't know about, obviously. But yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll see. We'll see, but they're going for the death penalty. And I think the family of the victims support this as well. I remember hearing about like 1 or 2 of the families that are like very outspoken. Cubs now the state of Idaho by and through the Latah County prosecuting attorney and hereby gives notice to the court, the defendant is counsel pursuant to Idaho Code, that at the time appointed, that as of this point in time, God, that was a little wordy. And based on the information known to the state to date, the following statutory aggravating circumstances pursuant to Code, appears to exist in this case to the crimes of the murder in the first degree as charged in counts 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the indictment herein. 1, Idaho Code. At the time the murder was committed, the defendant was also committing another crime, another murder. 2, Idaho Code. The murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, manifesting exceptional depravity and or 3, by the murder or in circumstances surrounding its commission, the defendant exhibit utter disregard for human life. And I think Idaho may be one of those states who, if they can't get their hands on the lethal injection, because apparently it's really hard to get some of the components of that, it might be death by firing squad. And I know that sounds really archaic, but you know, they can't do the lethal injection. You might do, some states might do the firing squad or like death by hanging. 4, the murder was committed in the perpetration of or attempt to perpetrate arson, R-word, robbery, burglary, kidnapping, or mayhem that a defendant killed and intended a killing, acted with reckless indifference to human life, and or 5, defendant by his conduct, whether such conduct was before, during, after the commission of the murder at hand, was exhibited propensity to commit murder, which would probably constitute a continuing threat to society. The state gives this notice based on the fact that it has not identified or been provided with any mitigating circumstances sufficient to prohibit the triers of fact from considering all penalties authorized by the Idaho legislature, including the possibility of a capital sentence. Consequently, considering all evidence currently known to the state is compelled to file this notice of intent to seek the DP. The state will continue to review additional information as it's received and reserves the statutory right to amend or withdraw this notice. Yeah, so I think right now, just for the time being, they're just putting this notice letting them know they're going to go for the death penalty. However, as the case progresses, they can actually rescind that. You don't believe in DP because you can't defeat evil with evil. Most humane was lethal injection. Yeah, but you guys hear about the stuff that went down in Alabama? Oh, man. There were 3 inmates that were facing DP, and when their time came, I don't know, man, they were having issues finding the vein, and one of the inmates, I mean, these guys are going out for heinous crimes, but like one of the inmates, they had to do something called a cut down, where if they can't find, okay, they're trying to find your veins, like in your arm, your other arm, like maybe your neck, even like your groin area, maybe your foot area. I don't know. They couldn't get a vein. And so they had to do a cut down where they basically just like slash at your meat and then try to expose the vein out. And like, when they wheeled the guy out, like there was like a whole delay where it took a couple hours. And when they finally wheeled the guy out, the lawyer wasn't with him. The people in the gallery were really confused because they were like, oh, this guy looks like he's out of it. Like, what happened to this guy? I think he was like really heavily sedated. And then like the warden would do something where they're like, hey, you know, is there anything, do you have any last words before, you know, before you're gone? And the guy was like he was like, it looked like he didn't even understand what was happening. And he like didn't say anything. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I hear like there's some crazy stuff going on right now. And like there are some states that can't get the actual like the concoction for the lethal injection. So sometimes they're like going through sketchy routes to obtain it. Like I don't know, man. I just been reading some interesting crazy articles about that. Yeah. I don't know. You know, in Japan, they just hang you. You just get hung. Last week, I think it was last week, right? And I put the video out already on YouTube. Sorry, guys, I was so late about it. I got lazy. But last week, the state was arguing that, you know, they did the genetic genealogy. Basically, we didn't really have the thorough steps of what they did. But from what we know from the documents, they had found a DNA on the knife sheath that was left under one of the victim's bodies. And so there was like a DNA on there and they were able to find it. And then I think they submitted the DNA to like one of those, like, I don't know, like the 23andMe ancestor, like not to that exact website, but something similar to it. And from that, they were able to find like a group of people, build out the family tree and stuff like that. Later on, they went to Pennsylvania and they were able to go to the trash. There was Kohberger's father's DNA that was on there, and they were able to connect it to the DNA that they had. It showed that it was like a paternal DNA. And then when they finally arrested Kohberger, they did like a cheek swab and they were able to be like, oh, hey, this is the same exact DNA as the one found on the knife sheath. Now, they don't want to... I was a little bit confused initially because I was like, I don't know why they wouldn't just want to give the defense everything. Like, okay, like, basically, this is the work that I did, and here's how I did it. Like, they didn't want to give the work of like how they did it, right? They're like, oh, you know, you don't need it. And I guess I kind of get it. Like, if there are things you don't need to turn over, then don't turn it over. But some of the I don't want to say excuses, but some of the reasons they listed was like, oh, you know, we don't want, you know, to have Kohberger's family members. Like there was like 100 searches that popped up. We don't want to have their information out there. You know, we don't want Kohberger to have information for his own relatives, which I thought was like kind of weird. But I started reading the defense's argument where they're like, hey, like, you know, we want to know like the chain of custody, like who had this DNA, like where it went and stuff like that, who had possession of it, how it was handled. We want to know what other hits you got, because, you know, what if, you know, we can exclude Kohberger from this, and maybe it was one of Kohberger's relatives or something. I don't know. I think that's what they were kind of going for. Like, oh, maybe it was a relative who did this. I don't know. But it got pretty interesting. So I do want to sit here and I do want to read it with you guys. It's not super long. So it's one of those things where it's like, you know, have you playing in the background. You can go cleaning, maybe water your plants or something, do some gardening. The declaration. Okay, so this is Ann Taylor. Ann Taylor is Kohberger's public defender. This is her demanding the state to turn over some stuff, because she's like, you know what? In order for me to properly defend Kohberger, I need you to turn in some stuff. Okay, we need these documents. I, Ann C. Taylor, do state and declare: 1. Counsel for Mr. Kohberger filed for a specific request for discovery related to DNA in the case titled Defendant's Third Supplemental Request for Discovery. 2. The state filed a specific response to that request. After reviewing the materials provided, the following remains to be discovered. A. Request 3 profiles uploaded to a DNA database. The state has only provided information related to this request for the seized item, the knife sheath only. Again, they have the knife sheath in custody, but we don't actually have the actual murder weapon. The K-bar knife, we don't know where that is. Yeah, we don't know. The defense has requested all DNA profiles, including 3 additional unidentified male DNA profiles developed during the course of law enforcement investigation. This information has not been supplied. So defense is like, give us all the DNA hits, okay? We don't care if you guys ruled it out. Give it to us because we want to do our own investigation. Because what if there's other DNA profiles that you guys didn't thoroughly investigate, and then we can investigate, and maybe they could be potential suspects as well, right? So that makes sense. I can see that. But the DNA could have just been ruled out because maybe it was just like, I don't know, maybe maybe one of the male DNA profiles came from like, I don't know, one of the victim's friends or, I don't know, siblings, family member, or something like that. B, request 6, communications. The state has not provided all emails, text messages, electronic messages, and or other messages or in conversations regarding biological testing in this investigation. C, requests 9 and 10, unexpected results and corrective actions. This request has been partially complied with. However, the response lacks the full scope of the request. 6 months before and 6 months after testing related to the investigation, further information relating to all lab personnel has not been provided. So they want to know who's been handling this. 3, part of the third supplemental discovery request was for materials related to genetic genealogy testing. A, the state has objected to this request in its entirety and has filed a motion for a protective order. Counsel for Mr. Kohberger requests this court consider the contemporaneous objection to the state's motion and declaration in support of the motion to compel. The requested discovery is properly sought pursuant to Idaho Criminal Rule 16. This discovery is necessary in the preparation of Mr. Kohberger's defense. Counsel for Mr. Kohberger has reviewed the materials provided in the case regarding the DNA testing, laboratory results, bench notes, and photographs. Further, experts in the field of genetic genealogy and DNA have consulted and offered information and guidance. So they had to hire 2 experts about this whole genetic genealogy thing and get their opinions on whether or not, you know, Ann Taylor, Kohberger's defense team, is going to need this. The state acknowledges it used genetic genealogy testing in this case, but it claims it does not have to produce the records in the specific request for the discovery. The defense disagrees. So again, the state is like, at the end of the day, your client's DNA matched the DNA on the knife sheath. We don't need to give you all the information and how we build out the family tree and blah, blah, blah. Basically all like the work, most of the work that behind it. 2, counsel has learned through a consultation with experts and sources referenced below that the use of genetic genealogy databases does not necessarily lead to a single individual as a potential suspect. So they want to know, how the heck did you get Kohberger from all of this? And that reports of the searches often reference multiple individuals for further investigation and DNA testing. In fact, the state acknowledges, such as the motion for protective order would acknowledge, hundreds of relatives. Again, so they want to know who were these hundreds of relatives that you guys had during the initial hit, right? When you guys did the DNA search. The testing conducted by a private lab is completely different in nature than a testing done by a forensics lab. So the way they do the DNA stuff. So when you're like going on like 23andMe or like the ancestry.com, whatever, right? They do a different way of processing the DNA. It's called like S&P or something, where it takes like a portion, I don't know, it takes the DNA, whatever. And from that result, it lists a bunch of people who are your potential relatives. And then from that, you go through like records and stuff like that, birth certificates, and you try to build out a family tree. However, when you're doing the DNA stuff, like in the forensic lab, when you're like getting a DNA and you're trying to process it, that process is called, what was it called again? It was called something about short tandem repeats, STR. Oh yeah, STR DNA. They process it differently. And with that, it's like, you don't get like a bunch of like possible relatives that could be related to. You just get like, you know, one person when you search in the database, like what the DNA matches to. I think that's how it works. Like, I don't know. I was reading about this and I was like, man, I took genetics in freaking college, but all this is just a huge, like, oh my God, this is so much information. Yeah. STR, short tandem repeats. So there's different ways of how they process the DNA stuff and the testing. And they're saying that like, hey, you guys didn't do the forensics way. You guys did it the other way, where it's like you take, you know, you hit up 23andMe and Ancestry.com and they, you know, they do the family tree thing. The tests used by the private labs are either S&P, single nucleotide polymorphism, I'm the last time reading that, or whole genome sequencing. These tests are similar to the methods used by the commercial services such as 23andMe and Ancestry.com. 3, based upon the information from experts in the field, I've learned that once a genetic genealogy profile is created and the testing is done by the private lab is completed, the profile is uploaded to the database and contains similar data from other individuals. Once the genetic genealogy profile is uploaded, the profile is compared within that database and relatives are identified. So that seems to be how they initially were able to process that DNA that was on the knife sheath. It is my understanding that once possible relatives have been identified, their identities are used to construct a family tree to identify possible suspects using personal public records, using, for some instances, contacting individuals for further family information. The process leads to a pool of individuals rather than one specific individual. So again, like if you're doing the forensic way, right, where you're processing DNA, that usually leads to like one individual that it hasn't matched to. The possibility of other relatives who might be similar to Mr. Kohberger is extremely important to the defense in this case. The processes used in this method of identification may be extremely important to Mr. Kohberger's defense. Well, actually, sorry, in the forensic one, they might list like other people that show up where it's like, what are the chances of this DNA being theirs? Like, you know how they do like the 1 in 3 quintillion or whatever like that? The possibility of other relatives who might be similar to Mr. Kohberger is extremely important for the defense in this case. So again, this could be Kohberger defense saying that like, hey, you know, it could be one family member who just happened to be related to Kohberger, you know? The process used in this method of identification may be extremely important to Kohberger's defense. The timing and steps utilized are extremely important to Mr. Kohberger's case investigation and defense. I reviewed a copy of the Idaho State Police announcement dated blah, 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 where it talks about the genetic genealogy. We're going to skip through that. I am aware of specific news reports in this case regarding Mr. Kohberger's DNA as published by the New York Times on June 11, 2023. Actually, I have not read that article. My New York Times subscription ran... Do you guys know New York Times subscription? When you pay initially, I think it's like you get the discounted rate of... like $4.99, and then after 1 year they butcher it up to like $14.99 a month for New York Times. What? That's so expensive. But I was okay with $4.99, and then I was looking at my credit card statement. I was like, wait a second, what is this New York Times $14.99 thing? Okay, anyways, that FBI personnel worked with the profile, and that author had produced, sorry, this is a quote, ... spending days building out a family tree that began with distant relatives. The New York Times source has more information than the state has disclosed to defense. The New York Times article generated intense media coverage and interest, the scope of which is explained in the True Scope report attached as an Exhibit D. So the state was like, we didn't even know about this, but how come the New York Times knows about this? They got more information than we do. In addition, Mr. Kohberger's defense team has discussed the use of statistics in this type of case with experts who have informed me that the manner of identifying Mr. Kohberger via this type of search may have significant impacts on the statistical analysis of the CODIS profile generated by the Idaho State Police Lab without access to the genetic genealogy search methods. So they want to know who else popped up in their search. Who are the other people or family members? Without access to the actual genetic genealogy search methods and results, it is impossible for qualified experts to address these issues. So when they hire their experts, they're like, hey, when our experts look at this, like if we don't have all the information, they're not going to be able to actually look at this with a full scope. Counsel for Mr. Kohberger notes that the state utilized a statistical analysis number to claim a high likelihood of match between the DNA in the sheath and that of Mr. Kohberger. The state, by its own admission, has taken a number of steps to identify Mr. Kohberger as a match. The statistical probability is not an absolute number. The size of comparison sample and the nature of the search are important to ascertain conclusion bias. Mr. Kohberger has a right to effective counsel. He has a right to confront evidence. Counsel must undertake a thorough investigation of all parts of this case the state brings against Mr. Kohberger. As such, the genetic genealogy investigation and process is necessary for the defense team to do their job. Ann Taylor, she's like, give me all the stuff. Yeah, I feel like, I mean, I get why they're fighting back and forth about this, but I feel like in the grand scheme of things, I'm like, I don't know. When you're going to trial and you're facing something like this and possibly the death penalty, you gotta fight even the small little battles and stuff, you know? But yeah, I don't know. I feel like he's pretty fucked, but we'll see, you know, maybe they're trying to see if his DNA was planted there, or like, I don't know, maybe it really was. Maybe Kohberger has a secret twin brother out there. I don't know. Maybe it was a family member. But all right, next one comes now. Brian C. Kohberger, by and through his attorney, Ann C. Taylor, public defender. Okay, so this is what they want. Standard lab discovery. Profile profile is uploaded to the DNA database. In the event that the case involves an upload of a DNA profile to either local, state, or national database, please provide all documentation maintained by the testing laboratory personnel within, including profiles that have been identified as unknown males. So they want other profiles that popped up. They want to know who worked in the laboratory, who handled it, and all the documentations, probably communications, right? Six, communications. Please provide a copy of all communications with the laboratory personnel and any other party. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's been cases where laboratory personnel may have effed up and maybe it led to a defendant to be released. I mean, I don't know. I think that's what they're just trying to see. They just want to make sure this was done thoroughly, just in case they can poke any holes through it, I guess. So they want all the information, the personnel. They want unexpected results and corrective actions. For each laboratory that performed DNA testing in this case, please provide copies of the laboratory's logs of unexpected results and corrective actions. The log should be provided for a time period beginning 6 months before the start of testing and ending 6 months after the completion of testing. They want the genetic genealogy testing and search. All reports generated by any lab that conducted the S&P testing on any sample in this case, including the samples were unknown males, not to the defendant, were identified. Copies of all communications with the laboratory personnel, documentations with the family tree, all documents related to the genetic genealogy search, documents related to the genetic genealogy investigation, DNA samples collected, the name and address of all persons found to have a sufficient sharing centimorgams. What the heck is this word? Centimorgams, with the subject profile to be identified as a match in the report created in this case. So I guess they want to know who else could have been a potential match. And then maybe, you know, they could be like, hey, you know, in trial, hey, by the way, when they did the search for the Kohberger's DNA, you know, they actually ended up finding matches for other people that could have been the DNA on this knife sheath. Maybe they did it. I don't know. I think that's something that they can try to pull in trial. All right. So this is one of the experts that they hired, and she's kind of an interesting expert. I believe she went to law school, and then she also studied like genetics. Bika Barlow. Yeah, Bika Barlow got a BS from University of California in genetics. Was his master's of science from Cornell, genetics with minors in cellular biology, but then got their JD from University of San Francisco. So they got a background in law and genetics. Now, this is all their credential stuff. Now, this is what they wrote. Oh, sorry, buddy. I'm familiar with the methods used to conduct IgG searches in criminal cases. I have been retained in other jurisdictions on cases involving this type of search and have received and reviewed reports generated by the private company that conducted both the testing itself and the construction of the family tree that leads to the identification of the defendant in those matters. I'm not going to read this whole thing. I'm just going to read the ones that are important, and then I'll skim through the other stuff. Based on my review of the material, I'm informed and believe that the use of these databases does not necessarily lead to a single individual as a potential suspect. The testing conducted by the private lab is different in nature from the testing done in forensics lab. The private lab does not generate a profile in the same way that a forensic labs do. There cannot be a direct comparison between the data obtained in this case by the Idaho State Police Crime Lab and the private lab. The ISP lab has conducted what is typically called STR, short tandem repeat-based testing, which results in a profile that can be uploaded to the state and federal CODIS databases. IgG labs use a different technology where individual SNPs, again, these are the two different methods, there's a STR and then SNP, are sequenced. The SNP and STR data cannot be directly compared. Once the IgG lab completes its testing, the SNP data is uploaded to the genetic genealogy database that contains similar data from other individuals. One such database is GED Match. So remember how we thought that we were like, wait a second, 23andMe and then myancestor.com, they just let law enforcement have access to your family tree stuff? Like what? But no, they actually don't. It's clarified here. So one such database is GED Match. GED Match has been acquired, blah, 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 blah. I'm only aware of one other website that allows law enforcement searches. Most websites, such as 23andMe, do not allow the use of their data by law enforcement and are used by most people for ancestry research. So no, they don't allow it. Because we're like, damn, they just allow people, like law enforcement to use it? Okay. Data is compared within the database and possible relatives are identified. You paid $20? What did you pay the $20 for? The determination of who is or is not a relative is subjective and based on the length of DNA shared between the two individuals. The comparisons in such database do not yield an identification of someone identical in the uploaded S&P data. Rather, it would identify possible relatives who might be in the database. So they want to get their hands on that. They want to know who are the other relatives that it popped up for. Once a putative relative has been identified, a family tree is created, working backwards to grandparents, possible great-great-grandparents. The family tree is then built down. The construction of these family trees is highly subjective and based on the use of public records, such as marriage, birth certificates. Difficulty with tracing a family tree may arise when there are events that sever a relationship, such as out of wedlock birth, name change, or adoption. In some instances, contacting individuals for further family information, such as noted above. This process leads to a pool of individuals rather to one specific individual. I'm going to skip through this. Okay, so this is where I thought it was kind of interesting. In addition, there has been a history of misuse of these IgG databases by law enforcement. Abuses by law enforcement of the GD match resulted in users opting out of the use of their DNA data by law enforcement. The abuses and protests by users led GD match to change their database so that users had to opt in for law enforcement use. Another database that allows law enforcement searches is Family Tree DNA. So if you guys don't want law enforcement to have access to it, I don't know, GD match, Family Tree DNA. But you can opt out of it, or you can opt in if you want. Automatically opts users into law enforcement searches. Never mind, Family Tree DNA, you gotta opt out of it. An example of this abuse of this technology, a Florida police officer obtained a warrant for the entire GD match database despite users' choice to opt out of law enforcement searches. Oh, wait, no, this is not what I thought was interesting. I mean, it's kind of interesting. While in the Dodge case, another relative was ruled out, it is unknown to the defense in this case whether every lead or possible suspect was further investigated and ruled out by genetic testing. Because a family tree generated by those genealogy searches often identify distant relatives through great or great-great-grandparents, a person may be completely unaware of the relatives in the genetic genealogy searches, unable to conduct independent investigation of third-party suspects. So here it is. They're basically saying like, hey, there could be a family member that Kohberger doesn't know about. And this could be a person that we might need to investigate. It is not possible for any defendant to investigate family relatives who are unknown to him and may in fact have been in the area of the crime. This material clearly is Brady material in that it would provide investigative leads that are otherwise unavailable to Mr. Kohberger. I have spoken with a number of experts in the field who have expressed the opinion that an IgG search can impact the statistical rarity of a profile in manner similar to a cold hit search, meaning the statistic that is generated by the analysis of IgG search could yield a relevant and admissible statistic. That paragraph was pretty hard to understand, but I had to read the book that they cited in order to understand what the heck they meant by that. Because I was like, what do you mean? It impacts the number, huh? In the case of a cold hit case, even a high RMP can yield a low DMP statistics. For inside an RMP of 1 in 1 million can yield a DMP of 1 in 3, which I was like, what? I'm still a bit lost about that part, but let me see if I can find, I think it's at the bottom, right? Okay, hold on. We'll get there in a second. Give me a second. Without access to the results of the search, including how the first putative relative was identified, how many profiles were in the database search, which databases were searched, and how the family tree was constructed along with the family tree itself, Mr. Kohberger has no means to address possible significant issues with the government evidence. Item 4.2. From the discovery in this case, it appears at least 3 or possibly 4 profiles uploaded to the CODIS database prior to Mr. Kohberger being charged. So they want to know who were the other suspects that the police had. There are other profiles that are uploaded, like they wanted to get access to that and why they were ruled out, I guess. Mr. Kohberger has requested to discover these uploads and any resulting hits or candidate matches to these unknown male profile, even if the lab has predispositioned them as non-candidate matches. When a profile is uploaded to the CODIS database, it is searched continuously against the database of convicted offenders and arrestees maintained by the state generally on a weekly basis. This ensures that as new individuals are added to the database, they will hit on evidence samples profiles if they are deemed a match. So that's kind of interesting. These candidates are then forwarded directly to the lab, then uploaded to the evidence profile for further evaluation. Hello, how are you doing today? Hi, Tyrone, how's it going? We're talking about Kohberger's cousin Hamburger. We're talking about Kohberger right now and the fact that the state and defense are fighting about this whole genetic genealogy thing. And then also the state had decided to pursue death penalty, which wasn't a surprise because, you know, they could put the death penalty request in for now and then later on they can rescind that. Oh, this is kind of interesting, actually. In the last 10 years of my practice, I've encountered a number of cases in which a database search has resulted in more than one candidate and in which, upon court order, the anonymous profile of the other non-matching profiles have been provided to the defense under court order. The number of non-matching profiles varies from case to case, including one case in Santa Clara County, People versus George Shirakawa, and in one, San Francisco, People versus Hernandez. The Hernandez case is illustrative of the subjective matter of this interpretation. In Hernandez, the lab uploaded multiple interpretations of a mixed sample to the state database. One interpretation returned 5 candidates. The second returned 28 candidates that included the defendant. In Hernandez, the lab opined that 2 of the candidates could not be excluded as a source, while the defense expert reached a different opinion that 15 of the candidates could not be excluded. The lab in the Hernandez case provided to the defendant the profiles of the 5 and 28 individuals from the CODIS search. This information was presented at trial in order to impeach the interpretation of the work done by the lab and undermine the idea that a match by the lab is an actual identification of a single individual. The fact of this match made by the CODIS system is considered Brady material because it provides possible avenues of investigation of other suspects. I wonder, because Kohberger's team kept saying that, like, there was something that would, like, clear him. I don't know. Are they going to say that, like, oh, it wasn't Kohberger that did it because it was probably a family member or something? Like, is that what they're going to go for? Given the subjective nature of the mixture interpretation, it's reasonable to believe that other experts might disagree with whom actually is a candidate. Yeah, and that's why the battle of the experts is going to be really important during a trial because, you know, whoever goes up there, the freaking expert, you have to have someone that's going to be able to really resonate with the jury and really be convincing that they're the ones that are smarter than the other expert, and you should believe them. In this case, in which the profile at issue is ambiguous and partial, other suspects are important area investigation. Laboratories are required to maintain logs. So I think in the state's order for protective motion, they're like, hey, like, we don't have access to this information anymore. Once it's been uploaded and whatever, it just gets deleted. So we don't have access to there was some information that they were talking about. Was it the family tree one? They're like, yeah, it's gone. I don't know. We don't know where it is. So this is Bika Barlow now. But I don't know. They attached like parts of the books, which I thought was kind of interesting. I just want to read a little bit of it. In 2001, states had just begun to make major inroads in collecting DNA from known offenders and storing the profiles in the DNA databases. So the reason why I'm reading this right now is because I think it's really important because it's basically the basis of their argument in this whole court document stuff. Catherine Troyer worked as an analyst in the DNA unit of the Arizona State Crime Laboratory. At work one day, she received notice of something interesting. 2 seemingly unrelated individuals, one white, one black, shared the same 2 markers at 9 of the 13 places in the standard DNA profile. Indeed, they also shared 1 marker at the remaining 4 places. Of 26 possible genetic differences, they had 22 in common. Yet that 9 locus genetic profile, so I think that'll be kind of important too, is that when they're comparing the DNA, how many locus, I guess, did they compare? Because the more locus you include, I guess, the more rare it becomes. Yet that 9 locus genetic profile should have been exceedingly rare according to the standard means of computing the random match probability. If you plucked a non-Hispanic white person at random from the population, there would only be about 1 in 754 million chance of finding that profile. For African Americans, the number would be 1 in 561 billion. For Southwest Hispanics, 1 in 113 trillion. And yet here in the database of just 65,493 people, it was appearing twice. And again, the probability is supposed to be like super, 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 super high. Or sorry, super, super low. And in people of different races. Importantly, at the time, one of the most popular testing kits for the forensic DNA analysis came in 2 parts. a 9-locus kit, and a 6-locus kit. Because the kits were expensive, conducting DNA analysis took a lot of lab time. Many analysis did not bother typing a full 13-locus profile in every case. Instead, they routinely did only half the tests, reporting 9-locus matches that quickly turned into defendant's conviction. Analysis also routinely wrote in their reports and testified under oath that 9 and 10-locus matches were highly unusual and rarely seen. But they're like saying, hey, this database that has 65,000 people, it appeared twice. So that shouldn't be happening if the statistics for it is so, crazy low. Okay, I just want to read this really quick and then we'll be done. In 1972, nurse Diana Sylvester was found naked near her Christmas tree. She had been essayed and fatally stabbed. Police had collected forensic evidence, but DNA typing was still decades away. The case sat open until over 30 years later. Investigators dusted off a badly degraded DNA sample and tested them, running the results through the database. A partial match linked then 70-year-old wheelchair-bound John Puckett to the only testable evidence in the case, sperm, found in the body that showed reliable results at just 5.5 loci, and possible results at another 1.5 places. On the basis of this match, the prosecutors charged Puckett with murder. Barlow promptly contacted Troyer for more information, but Todd Griffith, the head of the lab, intervened and denied her request. Shut out, Barlow sought a subpoena from Arizona court to compel the lab to disclose its finding. Barlow called Troyer to testify at a hearing to decide whether to grant the request. Troyer testified that she had found not just one matching 9-locus pair, but 90 such paired matches. When the lab offered no explanation why a 1 in a trillion events were happening regularly in the Arizona database, the judge granted the subpoena. Again, it's supposed to be 1 in a trillion event, but then 90 people, there was 90 matches, which is pretty crazy. I don't know. I thought this book was kind of interesting. The order also included directive to the lab to conduct a full search of the known offender database and report back all matching pairs. Of course, I'm not saying this might be the case for Kohberger, but because we don't know how they did the testing, but I think it's kind of interesting. So I can see why the expert and the defense is arguing like, hey, we want to know what you guys got in the search results, and we want to know how you guys did this. Because I don't know, maybe it might be one of those special cases where it's like this book right here. Ultimately, the report showed that there was actually quite a large number of these pairwise matches. The Arizona database only had 65,000 people in it, each identified with the 2 markers at 13 places that constituted his or her supposed DNA profile. Yet 122 sets of people shared the same genetic markers at 9 places of the 13. 20 pairs matched at 10 places, and 1 pair matched at 11 places, and 1 pair matched at 12 places. 12 places. Only the 11 and 12 locus matches were confirmed siblings. It is akin to assuming that you have a fairly unique identifier, such as 26 digits that represent birthday, bank account, and social security numbers all combined together, only to learn that a significant number of people share most of those numbers and in the same order as you. As news of this unexpected pairings swept the nation, lawyers in other cities pressed for similar searches. After all, if there were 122 pairwise 9 locus matches in a roughly 65,000 person sized database, how many such matches might be found in 11 million personal national database? A back of the envelope calculation suggested that a figure could be as high as 20,000, but rather than embrace an inquiry, the FBI effectively instituted a crackdown. Officials called Troyer's results misleading and meaningless. So I do want to know about this because maybe this book is wrong. But I do want to know what was their argument. Like the officials, like what did they say? Why did they say that the results were misleading and meaningless? The FBI also uses power guarding the national database to bully states to refusing to conduct similar studies in their own database. FBI leaders reprimanded the Arizona lab, claiming that disclosing the results violated its agreement with the FBI. So they're basically saying like, oh, FBI bully, we can't research this more. But yeah, I don't know. I thought it was kind of interesting. So I guess depending on how thorough you want to be with this whole like locus DNA profile thing, when you have an expert that goes up there, it's like, oh, it's a 1 in 5 quintillion likelihood that it's, that it is Kohberger. Well, they're saying that like, I don't know. It depends on how thorough they did their matches. Maybe the statistic that they're presenting, maybe it's not correct. Maybe there were other people that had similar matches, but that's not being shown. So I don't know. I thought this was kind of interesting, but I thought it was interesting. If you guys want to read the rest of it, it's all on here. She keeps going. It's a couple pages. All right, last one. This is just another expert. I don't think I'm going to read the whole thing, but they hired another expert, Stephen B. Mercer. And Stephen, I think I'm probably just going to skim through his. 6, it is a minimum practice standard for defense counsel's investigation to obtain discovery DNA testing of evidence regarding the prosecuting authority's decision to offer the DNA testing results as evidence at a hearing or trial. So again, remember the state was arguing that like, hey, like, I'm not going to present this to the jury. So it's not going to show up in trial. They don't need this. The defense, they don't need access to this. Don't worry. We're not going to bring this up during trial. This won't be like a surprise thing or not. But the defense is saying it doesn't matter if you're going to have this evidence at the hearing or trial or not. They still are entitled to it. So that's what they're arguing right now. The minimum practice standard for investigating DNA evidence is rooted in the ABA standards for criminal justice, defense function, citation, more citation, Number 7, the minimum practice standards for a competent defense counsel to obtain and review discovery applies to forensic genetic genealogy, DNA analysis, and search, and investigative genetic genealogy, FGG, IgG. Involves testing biological identification evidence from the crime scene or a targeted person, develop a genomic DNA profile, and searching the results in a private ancestry database. The laboratory ranks their search results by centimorgan. Oh, is that what centimorgan is? Oh. A centimorgan is a unique genetic measurement that describes how much DNA and the length of specific segments of DNA are shared between the GED DNA and in the database and the GED DNA from the crime scene evidence or a targeted person of interest. FGG, IgG also involves a genetic genealogy investigation by law enforcement based on the rank matches found in the database, searches to clarify the family tree of interest, and potentially identify the branch populated by the source of crime scene DNA evidence. I don't know. When the state presents their case, they talk about the knife sheath, how the DNA was left behind, and then they talk about the cell phone towers with Kohberger's phone and all that stuff. It's gonna be tough, man. I don't know, man. It's gonna be tough. I feel like them fighting back and forth about this, like it's still something, but they have a huge uphill battle with this. Number 8, the scope of discovery provided by the prosecution in the FGG, IgG cases I have worked on included kinship assessment from the searches of genealogy databases and law enforcement's genealogical investigative findings to clarify a family tree and further targets person of interest. Discovery included information about law enforcement's genealogical investigation of the top ranked matches and the persons of interest targeted for DNA sampling for further investigation. Discovery also included sample description information, chain of custody information, amplification, fragmentation, and precipitation details, hybridization information, and DNA input levels and consumption of sample details. The prosecuting authorities provided discovery upon my request. In general, the FGG IgG discovery is essential to the defense because, among other reasons, the discovery includes the results of a DNA testing of a crime scene evidence. B, provides match information from database searches and potential suspect information from law enforcement genealogical investigation. C, may identify the branch or branch of the family of the tree of interest that are consistent with the amount of DNA shared between the source of the crime scene DNA and known persons in the database. D, identifies the public and private DNA databases searched by law enforcement and the ranking of results. E, reveals the number of third parties who law enforcement may have targeted for covert, consensual, or warrant-based DNA collection. I guess the other thing, too, is that maybe one of Kohberger's family members may have helped the police build out the family tree, but maybe they're trying to say that, like, hey, you know, maybe the way they were able to obtain this information, maybe they did it illegally. What if they tricked one of Kohberger's relatives into giving their DNA and had that family member not done that, then they wouldn't be able to discover Kohberger and, I don't know, maybe like lead to the information to Kohberger. So I guess I get, I get why the defense really wants all this information, because they don't know what kind of things law enforcement or the lab people may have done. May identify the number putative. What the fuck is putative mean? Putative. Generally considered or reputed to be putative. Sorry, guys. I don't know. Today it's hard to read these documents. I think I'm just really tired. I'm tripping up with all these words. putative perpetrator. Oh, thanks for the heart. I don't know. I just saw hearts pop up on the chat. Thanks. Therefore, under minimum standards of practice for defense counsel investigative forensic DNA evidence, it is crucial for a reasonably competent attorney to obtain the FGG IGG discovery. 10, I reserve the opportunity to update my opinions based on new information. Okay, so I mean, I really do get why the defense wants all this information, because they don't know that, you know, what if what led the police to Kohberger was done in a way that was, you know, maybe illegal or something, right? Or what if, you know, someone in the laboratory, maybe they fucked up and it could make this whole thing into a whole mess. Or maybe, you know, perhaps maybe, you know, there's other suspects that they dismiss and the defense can look into, and they could be possible people that were involved in the murder. So, I mean, I get why they really want this information, but I'm also just kind of like, I don't know. I thought this would be information that they just get automatically. I didn't know this was like a huge like battle, legal battle over it. You know, I thought they'd just get it. I thought it was gonna be part of a discovery, but I get why the state doesn't want to turn it over too. Cause like they don't have to turn it over, and they're like, I don't have to turn this information over. I don't want to turn it over. So we'll see what the judge says. They had a hearing about it today, and it seems like the judge is going to decide later on. That would have really sucked if the evidence that proved it was him got thrown out because the legal means of narrowing it down. I mean, they should have other evidence as well. Let's say this whole DNA thing gets thrown out. I mean, you know, yeah, I guess it'd be really hard because even though they have like the cell phone tower, what else was in the arrest affidavit? The cell phone stuff was pretty strong. I don't think they were able to find any of the victims' DNA so far at Kohberger's car properties. Yeah, it was just basically the cell phone and his car being within the area. That's how they disclose publicly. Yeah. So we'll see. Okay. Oh man, I need some air. All right. So we covered Latisha earlier. Hello. Oh God, are we ready for this one? Okay, so this one's gonna get pretty deep. I'm gonna use the restroom really quick, but we're gonna get into a pretty deep subject, and then God, okay. Well, I'll be right back. Reading legal documents is already kind of tough, but reading legal documents that has a bunch of scientific jargon in it, that's even harder.